In the late summer of 1346, an English army led by Edward III would defeat Philip VI of France at the Battle of Crecy in one of the most famous English victories in the medieval period. Edward, the King of England, himself declared, was the rightful King of France by right of his mother, being the daughter of Philip IV, whilst the current French King, Philip VI, was nothing more than a usurper. Now the time had come for Edward to inflict a severe blow on the Frenchmen who had denied him his rightful inheritance. This was a battle that Edward was more than ready for, as were his men. The king observed that all his foot soldiers were impatient for the enemy's attack. Not only was the English army impatient for battle, they were clearly in expectation of victory. Having drawn up his army into three divisions, placing one of the divisions in the charge of his 16-year-old son, Edward the Black Prince, Edward held back some of his knights on the swiftest horses in the eventuality of the French attempting to flee from the battlefield. Banners fluttered in the summer air as the English and French armies continued to stare at each other, taunting and mocking the enemy for hours. All the while, the French gained fresh confidence with frequent new arrivals to bolster their ranks. It was only in the early evening of the 26th of August did the Battle of Crecy finally burst into life, with trumpets blaring, the sound of drums echoing for miles around, and the cries of the French piercing English ears, with Philip VI ordering his Genoese crossbowmen to fire upon the English. Unfortunately for Philip, the crossbow bolts that the Genoese fired had little impact on the English, who held their ground defiantly, remaining completely unabashed. In response, the English archers then launched a volley of arrows which became so thick in the sky that it seemed as though it was snowing, leaving the Genoese, unsurprisingly, in a state of great discomfort, with the English knights then launching a charge into the French ranks with the intention of causing further damage to an already disorganized enemy. And many a French soldier would be cut down by axe, sword, or lance as English arrows continued to rain down upon them. The French, it was said, were not helped by the size of their army, with many being crushed under the hoofs of French horses. As the battle raged on, Philip's ally, John, the blind King of Bohemia, was making inquiries to where his son, Charles, was. When the answer came back that the location of Charles wasn't known, John insisted that he be led into battle so he could swing his sword against the English. It was a certain death sentence, and John's loyal servants would have been well aware of this. Nonetheless, they bound their horses to the king's and led him into battle. When all was said and done, John was found dead alongside the men who had served him in his final request. Meanwhile, a message had been brought to Edward III. The Black Prince, the king was told, was in danger of being overwhelmed by his enemies and required immediate assistance. Edward III, however, refused to send any help. Instead, he told the messengers, the Black Prince would be left to win his spurs and prove himself to be a warrior of the highest rank. The Black Prince, just 16 years old, remember, would prove his extraordinary abilities. He stabbed horses, one chronicler wrote, killed knights, struck helmets, snapped lances, craftily parried blows, aided his men, defended himself, helped up fallen comrades, and encouraged all to good deeds by his own example. It would be because of his remarkable feats at Crecy that the Black Prince's name still reverberates through the ages until this very day. Night began to fall, and Philip VI lost heart. The French, it was clear, had lost the battle. Jean Froissart says, the number of dead French lords was very great. It must be said that fearful losses had been inflicted on the French, and that the kingdom of France was greatly weakened by the death of so many of her great nobility. Now that darkness had enveloped the battlefield, the noise of the French that had rung through the air only hours before was now transformed into an eerie silence. Edward III was overjoyed to greet his son, alive and well, and embraced the prince with fatherly affection. There would, however, be no loud celebrations, as the king ordered his men to spend the night quietly, resting and recovering, with the flames of torches flickering here and there. The following day, further skirmishes took place as the English put to the sword stragglers who had become separated from the main French army. So ended the Battle of Crecy, but it was by no means the end of Edward III's French war or even that campaign. The English would next turn their attention to Calais, which they would capture in 1347 and hold for over 200 years. Ultimately, Edward III would never win his war in France, with the King of England eventually accepting that he would never be crowned King of France after his failed siege of Rheims in 1359-60. But Edward III and Edward the Black Prince are widely regarded as two of the greatest warriors of the medieval age, and their reputations were largely built upon their great successes at the Battle of Crecy.